Thank you very much for joining us. As I said, this is going to be a webinar all about sharing report findings from some research that we've done recently. So we've got our team members here, Gavin and Dylan. So Dylan is our brilliant head of tech who joined us from the Labour Party, and Gavin is one of our fantastic senior digital strategists who spent time at NSPCC, amongst other organizations, and they have both been kind of engrossed in this research and report writing for the past few months. And so we're really excited to have the opportunity to share the results from this research that we've been doing, because what we wanted to find out is what are the barriers to finding, making sure that organizations are able to make the progress that they want to make through digital mobilization. And so we wanted to find out what are those barriers. It's something we've been speculating about for years, and it's great to have some definitive answers. Today, we're going to cover these things. So why we wrote this report, Dylan will go into more details there. And then we've got 5 key challenges that we've pulled out. So they'll go through those and then the takeaways, and then there's going to be plenty of time for your questions as well. So please do use the Q&A function within the Zoom to ask those questions as you go. And Florence and I will be collating those, and then we'll have time at the end to ask those questions. You can also switch on closed captions so that you can see what's going on if there's anything you missed. And we will be recording this webinar and sharing it with everyone who attends. So we'll share the recording and we will share the report with you after this. So you will have it all in your inbox within the next day or two, so you can take a deep dive into what we found. I am going to hand over now to Dylan and Gavin, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar. Look forward to seeing your questions as they come in.
Thanks, Ali. And yeah, so nice to see lots of people here, and especially from all over the world, or at least Europe so far. So this is a report that I have been working on for about the last year now. It's quite a long time, but we wanted to make sure that we did quite a good job of it. And like I said, these are questions we've had kind of in the back of our minds for a while now. So I just want to start by giving a bit of context as to like the digital mobilization kind of sector and where we're at right now. This isn't the nicest slide to start with, but I think most people would know that right-wing groups are mobilizing fast and very effectively with tech. They're using established and emerging digital platforms with alarming effectiveness to mobilize their supporters and shift public discourse. So to compete, progressive organizations need to build strong digital foundations to help fight back and to power change. But many charities and NGOs are held back from feeling the true potential of digital mobilization, mostly due to silo thinking, slow-moving tech procurement, and a lack of investment in digital skills. Poor integration, underutilized data, and leadership buy-in remain the major barriers. Forward Action's goal is to help progressive organizations use digital tools to drive offline change. One of the biggest things holding charities with campaigns back from realizing their vision is tech. And we've set out about delivering this piece of research to understand exactly what those tech challenges are so that we can help tackle them. We believe that organizations can absolutely create programs that can build large engaged groups of supporters, communicate with them quickly, build up a profile of what actions they're taking, and drive more income, action, and ultimately impact. So in this session, we're going to show you how to make that happen. We're going to start with the challenges that we found during our research, and then end with what we believe you'll see happen as a result of implementing some changes to how your digital mobilization campaigns are run. We'll hope you get a sense of what other organizations are experiencing, and you see that you're not alone in the tech challenges that you face, and that you also get some ideas for how to tackle these challenges and some practical first steps to take away with you. To begin, just a bit about the research that we did. So we carried out 2 main pieces of research to try to better understand the state of digital mobilization within the charities and not-for-profit sector in the UK. We created a survey that was sent out to our networks to get a broad understanding of where organizations were in their digital mobilization journeys and how far they'd left to go. And then carried out interviews with key individuals from across the sector to get their expert views on what more could be done. The research reveals a lot of areas in which organizations would like to see improvements. And in our report, we've highlighted the 5 that we've highlighted the 5 that were the most talked about. Before we get into it, just want to do a quick poll. So the first poll is, what's the biggest tech challenge that your organization faces today? There are 5 options that should appear on your screen now. there is fragmented systems, lack of skills, leadership buy-in, underutilized data, and accessibility. Spoiler alert, you'll probably see these five options a bit more in this presentation as well. So I'll just give you a few seconds to do this, and we will see the results on screen. Great, thank you for that. And yeah, fragmented systems looks like are above the number one choice, which does fit in very well with our presentation, as that is the very first one that we were going to talk about today. So through our research, we identified five key challenges that organizations face when it comes to digital mobilization technology. So those are fragmented systems, a lack of skills and capacity, lack of leadership support and strategic alignment, underutilized data and analytics, and accessibility and inclusivity as afterthoughts. Also, just note, we do realize the irony of putting accessibility and inclusivity as afterthoughts as the last section in the presentation and the report, but that doesn't mean that it's any less important than the rest of them. So to begin, we're going to talk about fragmented systems. By this, we mean issues with integrating your platforms. This was one of the most raised issues in the survey, and we've just seen from the poll that it's most likely the most common issue that you're facing in your organizations as well. So what the research is telling us is no matter how good your individual platforms are, if they're poorly integrated, your ability to campaign effectively online will suffer. Well-integrated systems are ones in which it is easy to get data from one to the other, where it's easy to report on data across all of your platforms, and where there's as little as possible unnecessary duplication between the platforms. We found that 9 or more tools is typical for a digital mobilization program in the organizations that we surveyed. But of those, only 16% said that they were well integrated. And this has a huge impact. Almost 3/4 of organizations say this negatively impacts or actively blocks their progress in digital mobilization. So tools need to speak to each other. Otherwise, you'll be wasting valuable time and resources just to get data from one system to another. Just another quick poll here is now as well. So how well do you think your platforms integrate with each other? Judging by the previous poll, I think maybe a lot of people would think not so well, but if you can just answer on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you think digital mobilization platforms integrate with each other? The poll should appear for you on your screen now, and you should be able to choose between 1 to 5. Once we get the results for this, Gavin is going to talk through some of forward actions recommendations on how you can mitigate some of these integration issues as well. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to complete this poll, and you should see the results now on your screen. Yeah, so fairly low scoring there. Most people saying 2 or 3, which I think does line up very well with our research. And so hopefully this presentation will be really helpful for you to see how you can mitigate some of those. So I'll just hand over to Gavin now.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. So I think, yeah, in a perfect world, you'd run your entire digital mobilization program via just one platform, but that would need to include a lot of different capabilities. So things like audience segmentation, automations, through to page setup, data management, and analytics. So the majority of organizations and most of the partners that we work with do have multiple different systems and platforms that focus on different areas. So the key really is just to make sure that they can talk to each other well. So if you're selecting a new platform, try to make sure it has native integration with other tools or platforms that you use or will be using. And if this isn't possible, solutions like Zapier can be really useful. So Zapier creates automation links between any number of platforms, which then cuts down on the need for manual data imports longer term. So yeah, in summary, spending a bit of time and resource improving integrations can have a big impact on your digital mobilization activity longer term. And it can mean you can respond quicker to trends, give supporters a better experience, and learn more from testing.
To unmute myself. Thanks, Gavin. The second one is lack of skills and capacity. So this is another big challenge that we saw come up in both of our surveys and interviews as well. What we mean by this is that there's often not enough investment in digital skills in organizations. So teams are already doing all that they can to keep things going. But if the investment isn't made to make sure that these teams have the skills that they need to do their jobs, they're going to struggle to keep up with new tech and trends, especially when they're overstretched, which is generally about 90% of the time. So this results in things like 80% of organizations relying on external support to keep their digital campaigns moving and growing, with only 11% of organizations feeling confident that their in-house team have been properly invested in. This will obviously affect smaller teams the hardest, with a lack of both time and training impacting their ability to use tools strategically and make those kind of strategic decisions that are needed when running digital campaigns.
Yeah, again, from our perspective of working with lots of different charity partners, we'd recommend three key areas to focus on here. So firstly, training staff in core digital platforms that you use. Secondly, building teams with cross-functional expertise. And then thirdly, exploring how AI can make things more efficient and give you more time to learn new skills. So where we often see the most digital mobilization success is from teams who have those skills and are empowered to do lots of different things. So things like access data, spot trends, writing strategic copy, and building engaging ads and actions. And to help kind of build and encourage this more in your teams, you could think about what are the main tools that you use on a regular basis? Are there kind of already internal experts who can deliver kind of wider training in those tools? And are they able to create user guides for platforms if these don't already exist? You can also use free or low-cost training hubs like Meta Blueprint or Google digital marketing courses. Think about how you can kind of build learning opportunities into your team objectives, and also kind of building that sort of learning culture. So things like monthly skill shares, potentially kind of buddying up different people from different teams or shadowing each other when working on projects. And think about if there's a project you could pilot AI with more. So, for example, using ChatGPT to write first drafts of emails or summarize reports to kind of give you that extra time to focus on learning new skills.
Thanks, Gavin. Some really useful tips there. The third challenge that we saw come up quite a lot was a lack of leadership support and strategic alignment. So, I mean, it's no surprise that support from the top is essential when you want to be able to power digital mobilizations and especially get the investment in your programs and your tools that you want to use. We've seen, again, time and time again, where digital is championed from the top and well understood at the senior level, those strategies have a much higher chance of succeeding. Financial constraints and hiring skilled staff are common barriers to progress, even with leadership buy-in. Because of this, many organizations struggle to get the investment for new technologies, especially during organizational change and strategic uncertainty. This results in digital strategies, and especially the adoption of new tools, being driven primarily by teams. But without the proper investment, these teams struggle to make the strategies a reality. So the teams want to be able to use tools and experiment and innovate, but they don't have the buy-in from leadership to be able to do that or the flexibility that's needed. 65% of organizations responded to that this was a key concern of theirs and that it would make their jobs easier if they felt that there was more support from the top.
Yeah, so like Dylan said, getting that leadership buy-in and budget flexibility can help empower teams to respond quickly to wider opportunities and jump on new tech like AI. And in terms of how you might kind of engage leadership, you can invite leaders to a screen share or demo to kind of show your pain points or the inefficient processes that your team has to follow. But then the flip side of that is also kind of showing when you've implemented something really great, showing how that's worked well and the impact of that. So having that kind of visual reference can really help embed understanding and explain it to others. And link what you're asking for to organization-wide objectives. So, for example, thinking about how integrating platforms or upskilling teams will raise more funds or drive more advocacy actions, and what's the risk of not doing that? It's also worth talking to other organizations and sharing examples of what's working for them. And hopefully this report could be a good starting point for that.
And next up, we have underutilized data analytics. So while all organizations have some form of analytics platform, GA4, Google Analytics 4, is still the most popular, the one that we see partners using most of the time. organizations still find it difficult to interpret the data that they have on hand. So they might be collecting it, but they either don't know what to do with it, or they don't know where to find the data that's relevant to them. This is often due to a lack of like in-house expertise when it comes to data analytics, but it's also due to analytics platforms just being often very overly complicated. There's a lot in there, and while that's useful to have that much data and that much kind of analytics in there, it also makes it more difficult to pull out what's really relevant to you. Because of this lack of in-house expertise and the complication of the platforms, we've seen that data analytics is the most outsourced of digital campaigning skills. So there just doesn't exist often within the teams themselves. And most importantly from this, it means that teams aren't trained on how to interpret the data to make strategic decisions. So it's all well and good if you're collecting analytics, but if you can't understand what it's telling you, then you're not really able to use that, even if you want to. And we've seen a lot of organizations struggle with the fact that they aren't able to use their analytics effectively, even if they're investing in platforms that aren't even free. So Gavin, on to you.
Yeah, so as well as kind of selecting the right tool to use for analytics, so yeah, kind of maybe using a kind of combination of Google Analytics, for example, and then kind of inbuilt analytics in engaging networks or the kind of action platform that you're using. So in addition to that, our kind of main recommendation really is to kind of upskill staff in kind of analytics and interpreting data and thinking about how you can build that culture where people are kind of really used to using data more. So for example, creating explore reports in Google Analytics or custom reports in engaging networks can take a bit of time to set up initially, but then will make it much easier for your team to quickly and regularly access the data that feels the most important to your activity. You could also set up reports to be emailed to team members regularly, or even just pin a link to dashboards or reports to internal channels like Teams or Slack or your intranet. So analytics are kind of always visible to everyone. You could also have reporting and data analysis as a standing item on regular calls, just to really encourage that regular discussion of what data is telling you. So yeah, in summary, having multiple people trained in analytics and building that culture of data literacy can really help keep on top of campaign performance and allow you to make optimizations in the right places that have the biggest impact.
Thanks, Gavin. And last but not least, and definitely not an afterthought, is accessibility and inclusivity are often seen as afterthoughts in organizations. And they really could be making them bigger priorities, especially in digital campaigning. I think at this point in time, organizations are well aware that accessibility is obviously very important, um, especially in digital. However, very few are making it a priority in their digital campaigns. 1 in 3 organizations said that they don't do anything or they're unsure if they do. And only 16% of our survey respondents could describe a strong, inclusive practice that they have in place. What was really interesting to me when I was looking at the results as well was that the people and the organizations who are doing something to do on accessibility and inclusivity, so that 16% of organizations, they're also the ones in the survey that said that they wanted to do more, which I think is really clear to us that that means that when you start noticing the gaps and try to fill them where accessibility is an issue, it becomes clear that how many gaps there actually are, and also that you could be doing a better job of it. Making sure that everyone can engage, regardless of their ability or background, should be a core principle in any digital campaign and not an afterthought, regardless of the type of campaign you're running. I think a lot of the time we'll see organizations that are putting effort into here are ones that whose service users, for example, might have accessibility challenges. But that shouldn't be the case or that should also be the case for any other organization running any other kind of campaign.
Yeah, so there's definitely some quick wins that we could all implement as part of our processes. And we've included some links here which we can share as part of the follow-up. But thinking about things like including accessibility requirements in project briefs, asking designers to run designs through accessibility checks to help check things like color contrasts. Copywriters can use tools to make sure language is readable and accessible. Encourage your developers to use web content accessibility guidelines in their builds, using plugins like Axe Dev Tools, which will help you do accessibility reviews of pages, and making sure alt text is added to images. And if this feels relevant to your charity, there might be service user groups who can also help develop content and comms with accessibility in mind. So most of these things can be implemented quite easily without additional budget and will really help make your content and tools as accessible as possible. Yes, then just to kind of, I guess, recap and kind of, go over some of the key takeaways that we've gone through. We know lots of organizations and teams may already be doing some of these things really well, and some might be more kind of at the start of the journey and kind of putting those tech foundations in place to run their digital strategies. Focusing on some of the common tech issues that we've discussed could have a real benefit. So, for example, helping you build a more efficient digital ecosystem, developing a team that is confident in pulling analytics, empowered by leadership, and is skilled in developing impactful support actions, and leading the way to a more inclusive and accessible digital presence. And then here's just a kind of example of how all this can look when it works well. So you spot a high-profile, relevant news story that has engaged the wider public. By having leadership buy-in, you can respond really quickly, build a relevant action, and get it live as quickly as possible. Having that good platform and data integration will allow you to select the data and send out a supporter email that same day. And then having cross-functional teams can also help promote your action in the daisy chain of existing actions or tie into other paid activity. And by having good analytics and have that kind of culture of data literacy, you can see what's working and what's not, optimize your new action page, and target supporters who haven't yet taken action. And when we see organizations do all this really well, they're able to respond quickly and see really great results. For example, advocacy actions at scale, cheaper cost per leads if you're running this as part of acquisition activity, greater supporter engagement and mobilization, and working towards real world impact. For example, MPs hearing from supporters who feel passionate about an issue.
Great, thank you so much, Gavin. And now we are going to move to the question part of the webinar. So Ali is going to jump back in and we'll be running through some of your questions.
Okay, thank you both. That was brilliant. And that is a taster of the kind of information that we've pulled out from this research that Gavin has been leading on and Dylan rather has been leading on. And like I say, we've kind of spoken to a whole range of organizations. This is the summary of what we've heard. But when we share the report with you, you'll see there's kind of more insight to back up these headlines in there and some of the quotes. And I hope that that has felt really useful for everyone this morning and kind of speaks to your experiences so that you know that if you're experiencing some of those challenges, you're not alone, and starts to give some more simple actions, because we know that kind of it's not easy to overhaul a tech stack for an organization, that you go through a lot of procurement processes. It's very difficult to get any changes implemented, but there are things that we can be doing and working together on as a sector to try and make those incremental improvements to try and help you achieve more with your digital mobilization. So we have a few questions to start with, and I will work through those. So these are quite specific. First up, Dylan, I wonder if you know about this, but what's the cost of a tool like Zapier?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the exact cost, but it is Zapier can become quite an expensive tool because you have to pay on as called a zap by zap basis. So a zap in Zapier is anytime an action is kind of taken and each individual step in your integration system is a zap. So say if you wanted to get a supporter submits a form on one platform and then it pings that to Zapier and then it pushes it to another platform, that's considered a zap. So you have to pay on a case by case, which can be quite expensive, especially if you're running large scale campaigns. So I think it's what we've seen often is that Zapier can be a bit of like a last resort if you can't find any other way to integrate your platforms. But I think it also just highlights why it is so important for those platforms to integrate in the first place, because then you don't want to be spending extra money on a campaign that you could be using for, say, advertising or your ads that is then have to be spent on just sending your data from one to another. There are kind of like a few tools. So for example, we've built Blueprint, which some people here might know or have used already, with Zapier built into it. But what we've seen more and more, this was kind of one of the core integrations we had at the start of Blueprint, but there's less and less people who want to use Zapier because of the cost of it. And so we'll try and do direct integrations with their platforms and directly with their APIs. So it's always, that's the preferable route. I think with Zapier, there are different plans you can use. There's usually limits to the amount of apps you can have on a monthly basis. So you would have to look into it and see what's suitable for your campaign. And yeah, it depends. I think they have some plans as well for smaller organizations.
Great, thank you. And we've got a few questions around analytics that have come through. So if I start with, first off, on analytics, it's not just the challenge that the data is difficult to interpret, it's that the setup of analytics is inconsistent across different agency partners and platforms. And have we got any tips on how to solve that issue where it's inconsistent across different partners and agencies and platforms that you're using?
Yeah, I guess maybe a slight follow-up question to that is this an issue across like one campaign where there's like you're using multiple platforms and you can't get the data out from that one campaign, or is that every time you do a campaign it's almost pulling for, like, it's difficult to interpret the data every single time? I guess slightly confused on that. I think what we do recommend is like having a good kind of initial foundation for your setup in your analytics. So whatever analytics platform that you might use, say for example, Google Analytics 4, I think is the most used, as I said. And so we did a lot of work with our partners in coming up to 2 years ago now when the switch to GA4 happened, in order to try and set up a kind of a base of reporting for them so that they had that a kind of a clear set of reports that they could, easily use as templates and duplicate, but also like we did some training with them in order for them to understand the platform better. There are other platforms as well that some do analytics well, some don't, especially the digital mobilization campaign platforms themselves that are in use. So for the ones you can build your actions on, a lot of the time they'll have inbuilt analytics. But yeah, the analytics might not be the best kind of things to look at. So a lot of the time what we would almost recommend is like if you have a good setup in one of your analytics platforms, say it's GA4 or another one, try to use that across all your campaigns, add it to all of your pages so that you're collecting that data across everything and that you can have that consistent one place to look. Also setting up things like dashboards is really useful, because once you set up one dashboard, you can plug in data from various different places. You could use spreadsheets or an analytics platform or something like that. And then you would have that set up so that it could just quickly feed in the data so that you can like go to one place to look at it. So I think it's that kind of thing of trying to create some kind of consolidation between all the platforms. Hopefully that's answered the question, I think, without the exact context of it.
I think to add to that, it's just, especially as an agency partner, we come across this a lot and kind of we work on projects and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, but this analytics, we can't quite track the results and things. So I think it's everyone being really aware of the importance of analytics from the outset and making sure that you've got those pathways to measure the right information in building, factoring that into the scoping and the building before you even get started, so that we know what the outputs are going to be that we're looking at. I think that's something that we try and do with our partners, but it's always in the rush to get things done. You're like, oh, and then there's the tracking. And if you can't track things, it's meaningless. So that is a huge barrier for a lot of organizations, we know. And then there's a couple here, really interestingly, around the kind of culture of analytics and how to build that culture. So one question is, and Gavin, I don't know if you want to talk to this a little as well, is that you've mentioned adding analytics into standing agenda items and building that culture. Can you say more about how we might build a bit of that culture and give people a better understanding of interpreting data? And then the following question that I put to you at the same time is that sometimes when other teams have prior experience of analytics, they then challenge the interpretation of the results and the data around that. And I think it's really important to recognize that data is one thing, but the M&R benchmark report that came out today from the US starts with this quote that like, where there is data, there are also feelings. And so it's recognizing that analytics is data, but there's also going to be interpretation around that. Gavin, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely kind of had experience in the past in previous organizations where sort of it feels like analytics is kind of quite hidden and sort of separate, and you have to go to a certain team for that. And that just makes it feels like that's really hard then to kind of draw insights and kind of see what's actually happening. So I think when you have that more kind of transparency, yeah, like I was saying, kind of just like pinning it to a Slack channel or Teams channel, kind of, or just emailing around each week, just saying this is what we've seen this week, this is how it compares to last week. I think just encouraging that kind of visibility and transparency around data, encouraging people to have kind of conversations. I think potentially even using ChatGPT to kind of say why has a cost per lead increased this week, or why is the data changing this way week on week. Won't always give you the right answer, but it can give you kind of food for thought. And I think, yeah, just having that kind of discussion with teams. Yeah, so I think just encouraging, yeah, more people to kind of have access, be more kind of used to discussing, interpreting, and yeah, kind of sort of, yeah, not having that as a kind of closed off thing.
And I think to add to that, it's really important to move beyond a culture of sharing spreadsheets. It's like giving people the tools and the power to understand what it is they're looking at and demystifying it. And I know like in some organizations, people are using tools like Slack as kind of opportunity. You use voice notes and you can kind of almost do mini podcasts that are like, here's what we're seeing, and kind of making it feel more like an event. But also something we do internally at Forward Action is I do quarterly updates I record as a video, seeing a presentation for people to watch in their own time. It's not about adding another meeting to people's diaries, but it's like, actually, what can you do to kind of give an update on that and then give people an opportunity to ask questions off the back of that? So it's looking at, we've got so much, how would you present information to your supporters? How would you get people on board? You need to do that internal piece as well of like, how do we demystify the data, show people why it's so important, and then show them kind of the result of them engaging with that and understanding it. So it's kind of, yeah, trying not to make it just a thing that people have to go through and add it into an agenda, but find ways to kind of bring it to life and demystify why it's so important. Because some people will automatically just go, I don't understand data, or it's not interesting to me, or I'm like switch off from that. So it's finding ways to bring it to life.
Yeah, I would add to that as well. I think like it's with the data that we see, it's always like the so what of it. Like, you can present the information and be like, oh, there's, this campaign was successful. We had like a 20% conversion rate or something like that. But then when you dig into it, like, so what? Like, who are these people? What are they going to do now following up? How good is the data that we have? And I think especially around that question around when other teams you feel have more experience in analytics is like, you need to also have your own kind of gut feeling around and your experience of like running a campaign. If you're in the campaign team and you know from past experience like this, that, and the other thing has happened, even if you don't have the analytics to back that up, like, it's important and you should have the analytics, so try and include that in every project so that it's easier for yourself to back that up. But a lot of it is because you're interpreting that from your own personal experience of like, oh, this is something that I've experienced before and I know I've seen it. And you don't want to lead on any strategy based on just gut feeling, but that's what helps you as well interpret those results. So we're like relying on your own experience and being kind of confident in that is also quite important in analytics. But I also would say that if you feel that other teams have better data analytics experience, that's why training is so important in it. And getting your team trained up in whatever platform they're using will allow you to be able to make that case better and kind of back up your ideas, especially if other people feel like they have, more hard skills when it comes to analytics.
And I think that last question about kind of what to do if another team is interpreting the data differently and understanding it differently and then challenging it, that's a really interesting and challenging situation to be in. I think there's a lot of questions around professional trust and building that. It's not necessarily about the analytics results, it's about taking a step back and looking at how those teams are working together and where can you build that kind of understanding of different expertise and experience, and then the respect for what your team is saying and why they're making those recommendations. And so it's kind of taking it away from the data and looking at actually the culture around those two teams and how they're working together, which is very much easier said than done, I'm aware, but it's definitely something I've come across in the past, and it's been possible to kind of build those bridges. But it is taking a step back from the day-to-day issue and looking at what perspective are people coming from as well. Please do add in the comments if you have any experiences with bringing your teams or wider organizations on board with analytics, and what culture you have around that within your organization. It'd be really interesting to hear if that's something anyone feels like they've made some good progress on, or if it's resonating as a challenge that you have in your organization. And then we've just got a couple more questions here, which are, On analytics, do we have any free analytic tool recommendations? Dylan, is there anything that you've seen out there that we'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, Plausible is another one that we use. And we've been using that kind of internally as well as like we've set up Plausible and Google Analytics on our website. And we've been looking at like the differences in the data they collect. Because that's also the frustrating thing is that often analytics platforms will collect different data and you'll see slightly different results on each of them. And it kind of can give you the feeling that maybe it's not installed properly, but it really comes down to the way these analytics platforms are collecting the information, what they regard a session to be. You know, if someone spends X amount of time on a page, is that a session? Or you know, if it's interpreted differently by the analytics platforms, it can come up as like having different results. But Plausible is a very, very much more stripped back version of analytics. You go in, it's a much more clear. You basically just get presented with one dashboard that has like all the information in one. So as opposed to Google Analytics, where you can like dive into like all these different types of metrics and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it never feels like it ends. Plausible is much more stripped back, and it's also free, so it's definitely something that would be worth looking into. I'd say for small organizations as well. It's also much lower lift, so you're not like kind of firing as many events, which means that your processing on your website is going to be lower as well, which will speed up your site probably by a few milliseconds, but it does all add up. So yeah, that's definitely one that we've been looking into more of. We want to see if we can kind of extend it out. You can also add custom events as well to Plausible, which is really handy. So you can kind of add whatever events you want to on your website.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the last question that we've got here so far is, what are some key training courses you'd recommend? Are there any ones that our staff do at Forward Action? Dylan, are there any key courses?
I think one that comes to mind is one that me and one of my team members did last year, which is so there's this organization called Lexic, and they're actually specialized in accessibility and neurodiversity training for teams. This is more geared towards the actual teams themselves than like management, like kind of hard skills people who experience or are neurodiverse. And this is, but I think what we found is that it's something that I would like more kind of managers, especially, to be doing in general, the different organizations, like having training on how to manage someone with neurodiversity. Because, but as well, regardless of the fact that this might just be for team members, it also kind of makes you more aware in general of how people are experiencing digital, how are they engaging with your website and your platform. So it makes you a bit more aware of like what you can be doing to make your kind of sites more inclusive and more accessible. So that would be one. And then another is, I think most platforms that we see that our partners are using will include some kind of like documentation, which mightn't always do the best, but it'll be documentation, a support hub, or a full training site. I think Engaging Networks, for example, is the platform that we see so many of our partners using, and has always been quite popular. And they have a full like academy that you can use, and you can go in and do like each courses that are dedicated to each kind of area of the site. So whether that's building pages or doing the reporting or setting up the account. And I think anyone who's going to be working on a platform on a day-by-day basis should do those kind of trainings and spend time when if it's either in the onboarding process or if it's like a new tool has come into the team, spend your time doing the training, do the academies, do the like look up the documentation, the support hub, because there is actually so much information there. Even like for me, when I've been using a lot of these platforms for a few years now, I'm constantly going into the supported documentation and just like looking things up because it's all in there usually. Some platforms are better than others. But yeah, I would just really recommend that if you're using a tool, just spend some time doing some like training on it. Even if it's training in an area that you're not specifically involved in. So in the presentation, we mentioned around having kind of cross-functional teams or having teams at least that have experience around like different areas, not just supposedly specifically related to their role or their responsibility. And I really think that's like really important because it does just help people understand things better. And relate to that question around analytics and like having that backup of the team is like, if you have a better idea of all these different things outside of your own role, you are able to kind of be a bit more confident in the way that you're presenting these ideas. And also, especially for a small team, if someone needs support or needs help, like being able to do that is so, being able to provide that support is like really important, and it doesn't put all the kind of responsibility on one person then. So yeah, I would just recommend like any kind of platform you use, look into like what the training is, reach out to the support hub and ask them if they have any kind of training specifically. Maybe they'll run like an hour workshop for you or something like that. Which is something that we do quite a lot with our partners as well, is we will do like an hour long or 2 hour long, however they need, workshop on like using the tool, just the basics of it. And it really does make a big difference in how people use the tools day to day, even if they don't feel very like confident in digital all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I would totally agree. Like tapping into the resources that each platform offers as well. So there's obviously trainings out there for things like digital marketing with Google, and like we know that Facebook has kind of platform training, but actually like using the resources that are out there on the specific platforms, and Engaging Networks is a great example where they've got a whole community hub and other people are tapping into the community around it of people who are using it as well. And you can learn from their use cases. But I think that point around getting everyone in your organization who's in broad contact with the tools an understanding of what they can do as well, and kind of interpreting that into a way that is going to be accessible for them and meaningful for them is really important. It's something that we do as part of our kind of digital mobilization work with a lot of our partners as well, is helping to get everyone confident in what their capacity and their capabilities are. Okay, I think that is the end of our questions from everyone who is here this morning. I have one more question for you, Dylan and Gavin, which is if you think like, what would be the one most important thing that an organization who's reading this report could do if they're struggling with their tech, or they feel like they're being held back by tech to achieve digital mobilization impact? What do you think is the most important thing that someone could do off the back of all your research?
I think for me, it can often feel difficult, especially if you're a member of a team, maybe on like, say, a more junior level, or just like someone doesn't feel they have a lot of say, is really that leadership buy-in element, because that can just have like such a wide impact. And so like maybe putting that effort in, even if it's talk to your manager, who can talk to their manager, who can talk to their manager, or whatever your kind of hierarchy is, like trying to get across the importance of leadership, or just someone senior having digital's back and being that voice in that room of just being like, we need to also like invest in digital, and have you thought about this, and like where does our strategy include that? It can feel difficult though, I think, especially big organizations, of being like, how do you reach that kind of level and make sure that your voice is heard? But I think just trying to, put the effort into showing why it's important, and getting them to understand that how much easier, say, your job would be if you felt more supported from the top down. I think that would make a big difference, because it just has that kind of far-reaching effect, especially when it comes to investment and budgets and all that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I think, yeah, leadership buy-in just feels, yeah, really fundamental to all of this, I think. And yeah, as an example, I've worked with a partner recently who are kind of in the process of kind of integrating their systems better. But things like that can be a lot kind of longer term, can be expensive. There was an opportunity to react to a news story, which they maybe didn't have kind of all the tech in place for, but were able to find a really good kind of short-term solution because they had that leadership buy-in, and leadership really kind of believed in sort of what they were doing and what we were doing with them. And I think just having that kind of kind of short-term solution is helping to build that case even further. And now they're kind of, sort of like doing things like integrating systems better, kind of upskilling and analytics and things like that. But it feels like that's really driven by that leadership buy-in and the kind of belief in what they're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with that answer for what it's worth. I think that's the most, like, if you can get people on board, and one of the things we work a lot with partners on is how to communicate the importance of that case for support. And with fundraising, it's very easy to do that in a way, because if you can look at kind of donation page conversion rates and things, you can showcase how much money is being left on the table by a bad performing donation page. But it's kind of looking at what's going to be the motivator that's going to change attitudes at a senior level that can then start unlocking that change across the board. But that was my final thought. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It's been really wonderful to hear from you, Dylan and Gavin, and to hear the questions particularly around the analytics and the culture of that. And that's something that we always look at the questions that are asked in these webinars to think about, is this something that people would be interested in hearing more about? So if there's ever anything that you want to hear more about from us in our webinars, do let us know. And I think that kind of culture around building an understanding of analytics and the importance of analytics is something that seems like coming out of our report, and research analysts is something that people are interested in improving. So that's something to think about. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar. We will be sharing the report so you can dig into it in a bit more detail. But if you have any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask today, please do reach out to us. We're very happy to answer them after the webinar. And I hope you all have a brilliant day. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gavin and Dylan. And we will wrap this up now.
Thanks, Ali. And thank you to everyone who joined.
Thank you.